In this video, we're going to take a look at how I've been experimenting with video conferencing classes with my sixth form to see how I can assess the extent to which they are learning and understanding and assimilating the new content that I'm delivering to them. I'm doing this with a view not only to the learning now, but also to September and beyond, whenever we're going to move into a period of blended learning, to see if I can test out some models and see how they might work. Now, before we get into the detail of that, let me take you back a little bit to some work that we did with staff before we went into lockdown. We were asking questions about what we want to achieve through this virtual learning support, and in our school we've been using this model to help us to consider some of the core elements that need to go into any kind of classroom delivery that you're going to be doing. How do we deliver the content, and it's linking it through to prior learning, inputting of new information, modelling of the application of that, and then the practice and feedback that you would get. And we're asking then these pedagogical goals, and we're starting with that first of all. How can we deliver the content, but particularly this one, how can we add value beyond providing notes, and how can we provide worked examples, and this one, can we enhance interactivity through video conferencing? So we started with those pedagogical questions, and then we asked this question: how can technology, and particularly Google Classroom in our case, help? And I devised this model that we could think about as a staff, and it basically brought us and linked it into these questions and brought us in at different levels with this one of the transmission of information, but moving up here then into how we can make adding value, how we can record the content, and many of us have moved on to do that kind of work together, providing video tutorials for the students, things like this. But then we wanted this last question here: how do we enhance interactivity through video conferencing? Now, there's ways of getting interactivity here through comments and questions that are coming in through the comments function of Google Classroom, and certainly the students are making good use of that. So the word here is to enhance interactivity. Is there any way we can do that through video conferencing? Now, that brought me then to what we're going to be doing with our Year 13s. We have a weekly class with them where we have a video conference. They have work to be done for them. Sometimes we'll provide videos for them. Sometimes it'll be the work like this, supported by their textbooks. Pardon me. And in this case, they were doing some work on coastal landforms, and the notes that they had to complete gave them some resources in here and some questions, and they had to answer those based from the textbook. So what I was able to do then is to have this handed in, and I'd set up this rubric in Google Classroom, which is a very, very effective way to mark, and a very efficient way. You set this set of descriptors up in advance, which then means that as I go through this, I can just go through the students' work. I can scan to see which level I think they're working at, and this one was level 5, very good work indeed. And then I'm able to provide a little bit of comment in there and return that to the students. So that's the work that they had done. This student has clearly worked very hard and has put a lot of effort into completing this document. This was very pleasing. But the question remains, to what extent are all my students not just doing the work, but learning and assimilating the information? So can we enhance interactivity through video conferencing? So that brings me then to the idea that I had of what we could do with this material through our weekly video conference. And what I've found is I've been experimenting with the interactive nature of Google Docs, which I think is a very useful model to consider for this. The way that I've been doing it is to set up this Google Slides. And in this particular case, what I wanted to do was to test the extent to which they knew and grasped the material by taking a look here at some exam questions. So in our model, we are inputting new material, so that was the work that they had been doing. But then this is the modelling and the practice side of things. How can I model how to apply this for the students, and how can I practice and give them feedback? So the first thing that I did was to show them a particular example of a question here. And the focus that I wanted here was particularly to look at how well they were able to draw their diagrams to illustrate this. You can see from the Chief Examiner's report, some people are using diagrams from the mark schemes. Whilst a diagram is not a requirement, it would be an acceptable approach. It's a core basic geographical skill to be able to represent what happens in landscapes through diagrammatic form. But what makes a good diagram? Well, I took two diagrams from the notes that my students had turned in, and I put them on this slide. And what was on here when they first arrived, this bit in blue wasn't. These two diagrams here, and the question that I asked them in the video conference class is which is the better diagram and why. Now, the list of names of the students that were there, which is quite a handy way of collecting some information, and I said to them, right, I want you to pop in there, and they were able to do this all at the same time and put in beside it whether you think it's number 1 or number 2. Now, some people were very brave and jumped straight in. Others were hanging back a little bit, maybe waiting to see what was more popular. But of course, because this was video conference, what I was able to do was immediately jump in and say, right, Alex, you thought it was number 2. Why did you think it was number 2? Matthew, you thought it was number 1. Why did you think it was number 1? And I was able to ask questions of the students and really do the usual thing you would do in the classroom of the questioning to tease out their responses to see what they're noticing and some of the follow-up questions. While they did that, I jotted down here some bullet points. I added this in while they were typing to pull together some good success criteria as to what would constitute a good diagram. Now, in case you're wondering, the diagram that I prefer is diagram number 1. A number of other students chose number 2, but they changed whenever they heard what I had said. But it's number 1, even though this fulfills every stereotype about geographers that all we do is colour in. But this diagram is fine, and it looks well, and it's labelled nicely, but this diagram has more detail of the stages. It's less about the focus on the artistry of it. The diagram needs to be accurate, but the focus here in the annotation definitely needs to be on the processes. So anyway, we did this. We were able to interact and ask some questions. But the next thing that I wanted to do then, having modelled that approach, is to guide them into this question here to give them a little bit more practice. Now, the first question was relatively simple. Describe and explain the formation of coastal spits. So they've identified that. The students just simply need to recall what's in their heads and put that down. This is an application task. And it's a very useful task for me to ascertain the extent to which the students are grasping and understanding this. Study resource 5, this photograph. Identify one erosional and one depositional landform shown. So already this is a more difficult question because they're not just identifying the landform for the students. The students are going to have to go into their heads and say, oh, right, what is an erosional landform, right? What are the possible landforms I could choose? And similarly with deposition. So, and they need to be able to do that as they're considering this. And then moving on to describe and explain the formation of it. But this is a really good test to see the extent to which they're able to pick up this information. Now, the notes that they've got here contain a lot of diagrams, and they contain a lot of maps, and they contain photographs, and they contain sketch maps. These are very basic resources, or very core resources, I should say, that geographers need to be able to deal with and use. But in this case, right, what about this? What are the landforms that they can see here? Now, what I then was able to do, there's their list of names again, was to ask them to identify the depositional and the erosional landform. And I did see some answers coming in that were correct, but I also saw some answers coming in that were not correct. Some students were identifying things that aren't really there. Now, this was really useful for me because it's the kind of thing that you do in the classroom all the time. Try to use questions to ascertain the extent to which students are with you. Are they getting it? Are they understanding it? I was able to identify through this some misconceptions and explain those and correct them. And again, I was able to go through this and just select some of the students and say, right, Robert, you chose a headland. Why did you choose a headland? Why is that the thing that you associate with this? And I was able to ask those questions and tease those out a little bit and then provide the explanation for them. So that question of being able to identify them really takes them an awful lot further. And I was able to come back then into their notes and say, right, well, let's look at this, because this shows you landforms at high energy coastlines, and it shows you this headlands and bays. So what you're looking at here is this headland high energy, and you're getting the erosional features, but with a coastline like this, you're getting all these little bays, and any bay you have is a lower energy environment, and you're going to be getting deposition occurring there. And so that is clearly shown here. But could they see that here? There's your headland features, and there's your bay. Could they see it? And the answer was, to an extent, some of them could, some of them struggled a little bit more, but it enabled me to find that out by asking these questions, and then to be able to go back in and correct any misunderstandings that had come out. Then the final part of the exercise was to get them to do the last part of the question, which is to describe and explain the formation of either of the landforms using the annotated diagram. So what I had done was set up a series of slides here. We just did this yesterday afternoon, so they haven't all finished. They've got to finish this by this afternoon. But they had basically had put a description in, and then they had to put in their annotated diagram for this. And what I was able to do was to watch them do this. They hand drew it, obviously, during the video conference, and then used their cameras on their phones to upload them to Google Drive or directly into the slides. And what I'm then able to do is to come in and take a wee look at what these students have done and give a little bit of feedback to them on how effective I think their diagrams are. And so again, what this is allowing me to do is to assess the extent to which they've picked up all of the good points that I'm making with this one. So the idea behind this with the video conferencing is about this enhancing the interactivity. So in particular, I can model the application of the new content, and the students can practice it, and crucially I can see them practice it, I can interact with them as they practice it, and I can give them feedback on that, all with the view of trying to secure and enhance their grasp and their knowledge of this content.